Kathy Bull. She's the LAF plaintiff who sued Ball State University. She'll be telling you a lot about that. She has a BS degree from Winona State University in K-12 and physical education. Her master's in the University of Wisconsin at La Crosse in biomechanics and sports psychology. She's a member of the United States Professional Tennis Association, has been for 27 years, and we're tennis coach, USTA tennis coach, and she's taught for 2 years in Woodstock, Illinois public school systems. She was an assistant professor, men's and women's tennis and volleyball coach at St. Olaf College in Minnesota, and women's tennis coach and instructor in the School of Physical Education at Ball State for 22 years, 3-time Mid-America Coach of the Year, 100% graduation rate, 14 ITA Academic All-America Team Awards, and over 30 ITA Academic All-Americans. Presently, she's working as USTA and ITA tennis umpire and is an advocate for Title IX and gender equity, and she's in Tennessee now. Kathy Bull.
Thank you very much. It's sometimes overwhelming to kind of hear your life laid out there. I must tell you, I didn't think I would ever say these words since 2009. It is my honor and privilege to be back in the state of Indiana with all of you today. A couple things before we get started with my path, my story. I had the opportunity to attend your board meeting last night. And I like to do that when I kind of get out and to see how different states and everybody does anything. Your board is working very hard for you ladies, and it was very impressive last night to hear the mechanics and everyone working together. And as we know, AAUW is about empowering women. In that hour-and-a-half meeting last night, they gave 2 young women an opportunity to go to a workshop so they could come back to their communities and empower other women. And that is exactly what we all are here for today. So I was very impressed with your board last night. My hat's off to all of you, and I thank all of you, the members of the state of Indiana. So congratulations, ladies. Yes, please. As you can see, I'm a little old school, don't have a PowerPoint. Still have index cards. My speech teacher would be very proud of me. And I hardly use them anyway because I kind of speak from the heart. It is a pleasure to be here today. It's the first opportunity I've had to come back to the state of Indiana since my lawsuit was settled, and to be able to speak to some of my peers. If you see a few stragglers in the back that came in kind of midway, those are my supporters. And that's just a fraction of the people who held me up in some really dark days when you're going through a lawsuit. And they're former colleagues and lifelong friends, and my hat's off to all of you for coming and sharing this moment with me. I appreciate it. A little bit, thank you. That applause might get me out of buying them lunch, I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. You're a fine-looking group, and I've really enjoyed talking with many of you today. A little bit about my path so you can maybe understand where my passions come from and how I got myself in this particular situation. I'm a true Midwestern girl. I was born right next door in the great state of Illinois. Freeport, Illinois, matter of fact, is where my family's still from. I was inspired by my brother to play sports. He encouraged me. I had supportive parents. Not micromanaging parents, supportive parents that just let me play. I also had some great teachers and mentors in elementary school, junior high, which tells you how old I am because we don't have junior high anymore. But I went to junior high school and we had organized sports and teams. And into high school I played 4 sports. And I was one of the privileged young women to receive a scholarship to Winona State University to play sports. Quite amazing to me when I think back on it, that I could play and somebody wanted to give me some funding to get an education. And I received an excellent education at Winona State University, K-12 physical education, and I had an art minor because in those days you had to have a minor. Have never used it except for the walls of my house look just fantastic. Up to this point, receiving all those wonderful things, I still didn't really know what Title IX was all about. I had my blinders on, doing my thing, playing my sport, getting my education. I didn't know about the women before me, what they had done, who had put this enactment in. As I was leaving college in about the 80s, my coaches, my mentors, they were frustrated because this organization called the NCAA, which we all know of, was coming in to take over the championships for women. Because at that time, we were governed by the AAUW. Let's not get that confused with all the letters floating around here today. That's the Association of Intercollegiate Athletics for Women. So they had all the championships. The NCAA saw an opportunity to make money off of the women, and they decided to come in and kind of gobble up that organization. But again, I was leaving, I was going to brighter fields, it didn't really affect me. But when I look back now, this is where the change started to happen, because I was always coached by women, refereed by women, trainers were women, athletic directors were women. But when the NCAA came in, all that changed, and that is where the demise, we started to lose women's coaches, we started to lose women athletic directors, and we are still losing them today. And it's incredibly frustrating. Because why? Because men saw opportunity to make money. So I know that now, didn't know that then. I went off, taught a couple of years in Woodstock, Illinois, coached a little bit, decided that I wanted to get my master's degree at UW La Crosse. How better to be a good coach than to go in biomechanics and sports psychology. I thought I can solve every physical problem, every mental problem, I'm good to go. Not completely, but it worked out pretty well. Moved on, and again, another lucky opportunity to go to St. Olaf College, and it is not Betty White's institution. She made St. Olaf famous as a city, but it is a lovely private liberal arts college in Northfield, Minnesota. I was there for 4 years as an assistant professor, where I got to use my education and coach men's and women's tennis and men's and women's volleyball, which I didn't think was a big deal. But I guess at that time, a woman coaching men was a big deal, and they put out a lot of publications about it. But to me, it was just sport and young people, and we moved on. Then I had this great idea that I should specialize like the rest of the world. Let's specialize. Let's not do all these things. Let's just do one thing. So I looked for a job in the area of tennis. And again, I kind of lucked out in life, and I went to Ball State University. And I was hired in a 60-40% ratio at Ball State, 60% teaching in the School of Physical Education, 40% coaching. And we were separate departments. Women's department, of course, in the old side of campus, in the old building, and the men were on the other side of campus. That was my first true realization in the late 80s, that there were differences. It wasn't equal. And I had a female athletic director by the name of Andrea Seeger, and she taught me a great deal about equity and Title IX. And we fought together that every victory for any woman in the athletic department at that time was a victory for all of us. And it was an exciting time, and we learned a great deal. Gradually, that percentage of 60-40 from teaching to coaching started to change until it finally became 100% of my responsibility to be a women's tennis coach. I continued to teach because I love being in the classroom, and I thought it kept me closer to my student athletes. And with my degree, I thought I can contribute, and the School of Physical Education allowed me to do that. So I continued to do that, and then the next big step in life was they decided to get rid of separate departments and combine us into one, and move us into a new building, which was good. That kind of equalized the playing field. And the greatest thing was that they were going to have Andrea Seeger, a woman, be the athletic director for the entire athletic department. That was awesome. And then at that time, that was groundbreaking. That was groundbreaking. And so we as women, we thought, wow, gender equity is going to soar now. We are going to make up all these discrepancies, and off we go. That didn't happen. Andrea Seeger was saddled with Division 1A football issues. Your football stadium's not big enough. It doesn't hold enough people. You don't sell enough tickets. Enough people don't come to the games. And her mission changed, and she changed. And gender equity at that time kind of stalled, kind of paused. But we were in new buildings, and there were some new opportunities, and off we went. A couple more years, my boss, Andrea Seeger, decided to retire. And I think I realize now why she did so was because she saw that she was going to probably have to cut some sports. And I think that's really difficult for a purist who just loves sports to have to cut any. So she retired. We had an interim athletic director. A new athletic director came in. He happened to be from Notre Dame. And he was a hotshot firecracker of a guy. He came in, and within the first few months, he cut 3 programs. And they were men's programs. So you immediately put a wedge between the men and the women. and with the premise of saying that if we cut these programs, we'll take that money and we will help the other women's programs that need to be brought up. So we're like, well, okay, we'll support this, not that we had too many choices anyway. But within a year or so, we quickly realized that the money that he had cut from those programs was going in to finance his football program. And suddenly we had lights at a football game, and suddenly we were redoing the football stadium when he brought in a new football staff, and their program was advancing and flying. And then we were told, well, when they build it, they will come. You remember that old cliche from Dryersville, Iowa? When they build it, they will come and we will all be better. So, being team players, we kind of went along with that concept. Somewhere in this time frame, and I have to tell you, we had the proverbial water cooler in our department, and it happened to be outside of Coach Terry Laux' office, one of my good friends sitting in the back who was a softball coach. We didn't have a water cooler, we had a Xerox machine. And that is where we all gathered to get our mail and make our copies and kibitz a little bit. And we did our fair of kibitzing about, oh, we're struggling, my budget hasn't increased for years, and we'd hear each other's stories, and we're falling behind, we're losing more games, and we said, well, we've got to go in, we've got to tell our athletic directors that we need help. I mean, I was over budget $20,000 every year, but I got very creative at fundraising. I had spaghetti dinners and sold mittens and magnets and car flags. Ironically, I never saw my male peers selling anything. We had clinics and all these wonderful things, but we made the numbers balance somehow. So as coaches, we would go into our athletic director and we'd say, I'm struggling, I need your help. And they said, we agree, we understand. And we'd leave, and then the next day we'd high five in front of the copy machine like we did it, we told our athletic director, and the next month the budgets would come out, not a lick of a change. And that was a pattern that went on and on for a couple of years. So you could imagine that our morale, our frustrations were growing. Our kibitzing from in front of the Xerox machine went to over a beer, and it got really lively in my kitchen, I can be very honest with you. And we thought we needed to come up with a better plan. We've got to do something. So Terry and myself, being two of the senior members on the coaching staff, we started to organize the women. We thought there's power in numbers, right? Let's pull together, let's do this together. But the women, as we wanted to meet, they were afraid to meet on campus. Now most of us are on year-to-year contracts. Only a couple of coaches, maybe the basketball coach or the volleyball coach, had multi-year contracts. The rest of us were year-to-year contract. So we would meet at 6:30 in the morning at Panera Bread, 2 miles from campus. And we'd have these meetings, we'd strategize, we'd decide what we were going to do. And Terry and I decided that we would kind of be the voices, and we would go and talk to athletic directors and so on and so forth, and see if we could get this out in the open a little bit more. And every athletic director that we met with, because we met with interim ADs and permanent ADs and new ADs, they all said, yes, they said the right things. Yes, we have a problem. We knew. We've got a gender equity problem. We're going to fix it. Be patient. We're going to get it done. But time would go on and nothing would change. And then we would hear that football got this, or men's basketball received that, and that gap. The most important tool that we ran into, and it was somewhat by accident, was something called the EADA, Equities and Distribution Act. It is a mandate that every university must file this with the government, and it must be posted publicly. There's 2 versions. There's a short version that you can go on any website, so you can pull up and take a look at it. Then there is a really, really long version that it takes someone like Dr. Arlene Ignico, who's sitting in the back, to interpret for us and create a study for us to kind of look year after year to really tell us. And it shows us where every dollar that comes in or goes out of your athletic department goes. So that gender gap that we thought we had, when the new athletic director came in, that gap became a canyon, and it just kept widening. And we had a gender equity plan that was expiring, and it wasn't being met to begin with. Now here's another unique fact about Ball State University. The majority of their athletic funding comes from the student activity fees. You'll remember those fees when you all went to school. Everybody pays an activity fee. 86% of the activity fee at Ball State University goes to athletics. Nobody knows that. What we do is we tell the students, you can go to all the games for free. Well, they're paying for all those games, to be honest with you. The rest of the money comes from Ball State would sit down at the table with the English department, math, science, whatever, and then they fight over the money. So what the university does is their Senate has committees that comes to these departments, to the athletic department, to kind of monitor what's going on and then take information back to the Senate. And it's the way the reporting system worked. So we had an athletics committee. And what we found out, and again, Dr. Ignico was on this committee for several years, and she was kind of the gender equity guru that was kind of trying to push some issues and get some things going. First, the committee was never always given the straight skinny on what was going on. That was hard. Or they were given it so late that they couldn't do anything about it. So we realized that it was kind of a very unique committee that was in place, but it wasn't a very active committee. But it was part of the process and how you're supposed to work through it. So we tried to even go in and speak to this committee to try to say, we know what you maybe think is right here or what they're telling you, but here are our struggles. You know, we are having to put 4 women in a hotel room. We're having to shove in a 15-passenger van. We're having to come in at nights too late when we should be staying an additional night, but our male peers are not doing this. For me, it was simple things like every day the male tennis coach would drive up in a courtesy car, a university courtesy car. And that was from the very first day I was there. And I drove my car and I was like, okay, he's been here a little bit longer than I was. And then it was every year they had a media poster and a media guide that went up. We maybe had one every 3 years. And I was trying to make my student athletes aware of this, because the best case scenario is when a student athlete walks in and demands Title IX and gender equity. They are much more powerful than us who work there. And there were examples I kept saying to my team, isn't that funny? The men's tennis team flies 3 or 4 times a year around the country. We fly once every 4 or 5 years if we sell enough mittens and magnets. Isn't that odd? So there were some really glaring discrepancies just in my program. So we were trying to share that with the athletics committee to say something needs to be done. So it got their attention, and it forced the athletic department to come up with another gender equity plan, but it was like pulling teeth. Now at the same time, we now are on to our 3rd athletic director, a gentleman from Arizona State who took the job after never setting foot on campus or never meeting one of his coaching staff. It was done by a firm, and he was introduced even in Indianapolis. I was summoned to go there. And he came in and spoke great tongue. We went in and talked with him, and he goes, yes, we have a problem. Yes, we're going to fix it. Yes, we're going to do it. Didn't do a thing. Didn't do a thing. But also at this time, what we were finding is that many women in athletics were losing their jobs. Women's coaches. They were not being supported. They wanted to get the heck out of there. They were being terminated. They were being forced to resign. They wanted to leave. It wasn't happening on the men's side. And actually, we have a statistic that I'll share with you that under President Gora and Tom Collins, 12 women's coaches lost their jobs, were forced to leave. I was number 12. It goes unprecedented in this country, under any university, not just Division I, that in a 4 or 5 year period you would lose 12 members of your women's coaching staff. And you have to ask why. Somebody should ask why. Part of the problem is I did ask why. And I got not much of an answer. But this battle was ongoing, and it was frustrating, and we were failing miserably as a women's department. And you can imagine what the morale was like. As coaches, we were still meeting privately off campus, and we decided to ratchet up a notch. I went and had a face-to-face with our new female president, Joanne Gora, who gave me her assurance. Yes, we know that there's a problem. Yes, we're passionate about it also. Yes, be patient, we will get it corrected. Okay, cool, did my job. I started speaking publicly. I started going into women's studies classes and speaking to them about Title IX and gender equity and explaining to them, you know, it's not just about sport. I was so glad. I think you said that today. Remember, Title IX is not just about sport. We just took it up as our banner and have maybe used it a little bit more than others. And I started to speak at the local NOW organizations. I befriended our local senator, Sue Arrington, and she tried to help our cause and met with the president. And then on her behalf, I went with her and spoke on the floor of the state house in regards to the Equal and Fair Pay Act and how it affected my graduates, the young women in my program that I tried to talk to, because I was very lucky. I had really bright, intelligent women on my tennis team. I really respected my education, and I wanted them to, and they did. And I tried to explain to my women, we'd be out practicing, and I'd point out a young man on the men's side practicing, and I said, you guys are business majors. Yeah, he goes, he's not very good. He's a 2.0. And I said, you know, when you graduate, I said, he's probably going to make more money than you. No way, Kath. No, you're just full of it. And I go, no, I'm really very serious. These are facts. Usually 5, 6, 7 years later, I get a call or maybe an email, and they get it now. They understand it now. And they're frustrated and they want to know what to do. But at that moment, just like me when I was back in college, you have your blinders on and you're going through life and you're taking your opportunities and trying to do the best with them. So we're at a tipping point now at Ball State. And every time I did go out to speak, I always informed my athletic director or my immediate supervisor, because I really believe in communication. I never wanted to be surprised myself. My first athletic director, Andrea Seeger, hated surprises, so I didn't want my new bosses to ever be surprised. So I was telling them that I was going out, and we were getting it in the newspaper, and the athletics committee was trying to step it up and put the pressure on the department. And they did finally come up with a new gender equity plan, but at the end of the year when we looked at the numbers, it didn't make a difference. They didn't come through with half of the things that they had in the gender equity plan. There's no check and balance system. And then at the same time, they were still giving money to the men's side, so the gap just continued on. Even though they could say, well, Kathy, we have a gender equity plan, but you're not adhering to it. So the frustrations kept going. Several of my peers were losing their jobs, if not leaving. I think for me, the straw that broke the camel's back was when my good friend Terry Lux was forced into resignation. And one of the topics they brought up is that she was forced to do clinics just to be able to make her budget work so she could travel and do the basics in softball, giving up weekends, and of course her athletes had help. She had full approval from the department to do so. But then when it was time to kind of push her out, so to speak, they came back and said, well, those were illegal. You shouldn't have been doing those clinics, even though that they approved them and they knew that she was doing them. And so I knew that if they were going to remove a really good person like Terry Laux, they were not going to make good on any of their things that they had been telling us. So it was another, for me, that was really the straw that broke the camel's back, that we went just a little bit harder on our push to try to get some things accomplished. Now, in this whole time frame, we are talking to people at the Office for Civil Rights, Women's Sports Foundation, National Women's Law Center. We are using education as our powerful tool, because we knew that we had the law on our side. We knew what we were doing was right. We knew that administration should be administering to their entire student body, not just to the males. We knew what the ratio was in your student body. It was 54% females, so therefore 54% of your funding in your athletic department should be going to the females. But it was just the opposite, if not exaggerated the other way. And you called them on the carpet. What was interesting is that all the organizations, especially the OCR, said, Kathy, you and your peers have to go in and demand equality. And I said, you mean going in and telling them that I'm $20,000 over budget on a regular basis and that I need help, I need their assistance, is not demanding equality? And I guess it wasn't. They go, you have to demand equality. So we had this strategy. We thought, okay, we're trying to get it out in the public. We're trying to speak about it. We're trying to get it in the newspapers, several great articles. We're talking candidly to our athletic directors. There's supposed to be programs in place. The president is supposed to be knowing what to do. But the bottom line is, universities can kind of do what they want to do, because who do they answer to? To themselves. So all of a sudden, on a February afternoon in about 2008, I believe, I got a phone call, and someone said, I did it. And I said, what? And they said, I finally filed the official complaint with the Office for Civil Rights. There's going to be a full investigation. And I kind of paused for a second, because I was this dreamer, and I was trying to believe in my administrators, and I was trying to do the right thing, work within the system, and I was just getting beat up. And so I can hear that phone call, and I said, okay, well, let's see what happens. Well, time went by, and the complaints are anonymous. The institutions are not supposed to know where they come from. So we didn't hear anything about it in the athletic department. That spring of 2008, now it's a spring after Terry she resigned in 2007, and a little twist on that particular story. The day after she left, a secretary came up and she said, "I need to talk to the two of you." And she pulled us off the side. She said, right after Terry resigned, she said, 2 athletic directors stood in front of my desk and said, "Now that we've gotten rid of Terry Laux, Kathy Bull better watch out, she's going to be next." And being a little frustrated at the time, Terry and I just looked at each other. Terry was packing boxes, and I charged down to my athletic director, closed the door, went in, told him in so many terms how unprofessional, I just went on and on and on that, this should not happen. It should not be talked about in public. It shouldn't be said, period, on and on, thinking that he would possibly do something about it. In deposition a few years later, when he was asked about that particular situation, they said, did this situation happen? He said, "Yes, it did." And they said, "What course of action did you take?" He said, "Well, none. Kathy Bull didn't ask me to do anything about it." So now you know what kind of administrators you're working with, and you understand the frustrations and where we're coming from. So he thought just by listening to me, he did his job, where he never talked to an administrator, to the administrator who made these particular comments. So now we're in 2008. The complaint has been filed. Nobody knows anything about it. There's really, 2 of us. Nobody in the department knows about it. I go in for my evaluation with a senior women's administrator who had been on campus for 3 months. Didn't know me. So it had been my 20th evaluation. It was the first negative evaluation I'd ever gotten in my life. She had photocopied my signature on the final evaluation, added things to my evaluation that we had not talked about, adjusted it in a lot of ways, and I wasn't going to stand for it. And I went down and demanded a meeting between the athletic director and the SWA, and she threw her hands up and acted like there was nothing wrong. At that moment, I decided to file an internal complaint. I hired an attorney through some friends' advice out of Ann Arbor, Michigan. Wrongful termination, because it just didn't feel right. And I filed the internal complaint, contacted Office for Civil Rights, and of course the internal complaint means that someone in university compliance at Ball State investigates themselves, and they look over the athletic department. So after a 3-month investigation, I filed the complaint against the athletic director, Tom Collins, the senior women's administrator, and against Pat Quinn, who was a true instigator of most of those women leaving, of the 12 that were pushed out, forced to resign, or decided to leave. And of course the results came back that there were no findings, and that we all should be very careful and not retaliate against each other. The secretary that had come forth with that information that I told you, that Kathy Bull will be next, she was reprimanded for, she said she was told to not listen in on private conversations, even though the conversation was put in front of her desk on her lap. So again, you see what we're up against. The odds are not boding very well in our favor. So 2008 goes by, I file the complaint, we start the season, we go on. The next spring, I get a positive evaluation. Now in this time, the OCR now starts to come on campus. They come in for their first visit, and I've got to be honest with you, if you're in athletics at all, the one thing they tell you, you never want the OCR to come in for an investigation. It's the Office for Civil Rights, okay? And they come in, and they tear everything apart. They want to know every ounce of everything that is done. And these are what the Title IX investigations are. And anyone in high school athletics, college athletics, it's probably the worst red mark you can have against you, is to have them come in. And the amount of work that goes into giving them the information they need, and they find out everything. Because the original complaint said that Ball State was out of line in 7 areas. There's a laundry list of things, it's budget and travel and so on and so forth. Actually, the OCR found them in violation of 10. So it was even worse than what we had even thought. So when they very first came on for their first 3 days, they weren't going to meet with any of the coaches. Now, we've been in contact with them several times for previous years, so I scheduled a meeting for women's coaches, but again, it had to be off campus at the Holiday Inn with 4 of the lead investigators, and we sat for 3.5 hours, and they heard our stories. So that happened. We go through a school year. I get my next positive evaluation in 2009, and it says, everything's okay, we need to do a little bit better in the win-loss record. I understood that. And it even said that I had a very good record in compliance, which is rules. You've probably heard of NCAA rule violations and so on and so forth. So the summer goes on, And that September, as we're starting the new school year, I had done a fitness run with my team for 20 years. You do it before school, you find out if your kids have been working out in the summer, and then we have a picnic. So we did that. Well, come to find out about a week or so later, I realized that the rules had changed and I had made a mistake. So I self-reported. That's what you do, and they're called secondary violations. So I went into this administrator, Pat Quinn, who is kind of a Jekyll and Hyde, and he's one of the people that had the internal complaint, but he was in charge of compliance, so I told him I had made a mistake. So what happens is you file some paperwork, and there's a trickle-down effect that there's that violation, then I would have had 2 more practice violations, because then I would have been over my hours. And I know this sounds like, what in the heck is she talking about? But this is a life of Division I athletics. The rule book is about like this. So I did what I was supposed to do. I self-reported, and I kind of thought that was the end of it. I left on Labor Day weekend to close up my cabin at that time down in Tennessee. I didn't know that at that time they were doing a full-scale investigation behind my back with my players. I had suspended a young woman. She was a walk-on player on my team the previous spring for the abuse of alcohol and marijuana. I did it within house, thinking that I was doing her a favor, kind of keeping it quiet, but her mother thought the opposite, that I had no right to control her alcohol consumption or her use of recreational marijuana. And I said, well, that's funny. I said, when you put on a Ball State uniform, I said, you sign a sheet. And I said, you're representing a university, you're representing me. And I said, and as long as I'm in charge of the program, I said, you know, this is the way it's going to go. And so that was not the right answer for her. So this athletic director, this Pat Quinn that I'd filed the internal complaint against, he jumped on that particular opportunity, and they exaggerated the setup, and off we went. So this was Labor Day weekend. I went through my fall season. I didn't know any of this was going on. On an October Monday noon, I think it was October 19th, 12:55 to be exact, I was summoned into the office of the senior women's administrator, same one that had given me my one and only negative evaluation. And I said, well, I got practice. She goes, no, you need to come in. So as I walk in, she's sitting there, and then a compliance person is there, and they hand me a stack of about 32 pieces of paper. And of course, you don't really get to read 32 pieces of paper. And basically, she gave me about 2 minutes, and she said, you have until 5 o'clock this afternoon to decide if you want to be terminated or if you'd like to resign. And it was under the basis of NCAA violations, and they called them major violations. And so I'm trying to ask questions, because you know your head is, you don't know where your head is, and they don't respond to any of my questions. So I figure, well, that's a moot point. So I decide to leave. I make a phone call, and I call my partner. I said, we got a problem. We got to go home and work on it. And it started right then and there. I think I made 2 phone calls that afternoon. I was on the phone for about 12 hours, but I called the attorney back that I'd worked with in Ann Arbor, and I'd called a good friend of mine in Western Michigan who's been a longtime friend and a huge supporter. And it started, and at 1 minute to 5, I called back to the athletic director and I said, you'll need to terminate me. I said, I'm not resigning. Now, I've been there 22 years. 22 years, I thought I was in good standing. I did a lot of community service work. I love the community. I love the university, and I don't think there is anybody here from Ball State, but Ball State is a fine university. I want to go on record saying that, and you may say, I can't believe you're saying that. I have great respect for the faculty and staff at Ball State University. I only have some ill feelings towards a couple athletic administrators that wanted to do things their way, and unfortunately the president of the university, who I do not think supports women. But I don't ever want to make a slam on Ball State University, because it gave some fantastic educations to several of the women. If you look at my record, the proudest moment I have in life is to say that I had a 100% graduation rate, because that's what we're all about. That's what we do. That's what we're supposed to do in athletics. So the next morning we went in, we read a brief statement that said, like 2 or 3 things. It was about a 30-second meeting. We left and the process began. And what you have to understand is a lot of things are going on at Ball State. There's a lot of gender discrimination that was going on in this particular department. Here's a real key element to this, my whole argument. We had hired a kind of a controversial basketball coach by the name of Ronnie Thompson. And he comes from a great basketball family. He came in, he wasn't very successful. He wanted to break his 3-year contract and leave Ball State. So he kind of charged that we were a racially hostile athletic department. Well, that's a PR nightmare for anybody. So the president of the university, who was President Gore at that time, decided to take a couple of her professors in psychology, and they created a climate assessment for the athletic department because they needed to come out and say, we don't have any racial issues at Ball State. And I'm sure that we do, let's be point blank honest. There's got to be some, that hasn't gone away. So all of us in the department, they used us to help build the tool, and we were told, you will take the assessment, it will be made public, you will get a copy of it, we will work on this together, and so on and so forth. And many of you, we would like for you to come over for personal interviews. So we helped build this tool, and besides looking at racial issues, they decided to kind of expand it, look at gender equity and leadership and so on and so forth. So we take the tool, we sign, what you have to sign when you take a climate assessment. When the results were supposed to come out, nobody wanted to talk about it. The president didn't want to talk about it. The 2 psychologists who I'd worked with for 9, 10, 11 months, all of a sudden the president decided to close the results, not let them be public. They made a brief statement that we were not, the results of the climate assessment, we were not a racially hostile department. We had incredibly poor leadership, and they kind of propped the athletic director, Tom Collins, up there, the gentleman that I had some run-ins with, and he said, yes, I'm a terrible leader and I need to get better, please give me a second chance. That didn't happen. And then on a sub-note she said, and we have some gender equity issues, and that was it. And I contacted her personally, and she said, well, to protect people, we're not going to allow the results of that to come out. And I said, how can you do that? You took public state money, you took 2 professors, you gave them a year sabbatical to do this. Again, universities can do what universities want to do because they kind of answer to themselves. So we tried to get the faculty involved, but it was kind of a done deal. Well, in my lawsuit that we eventually filed, we got that climate assessment open for about 1 week. Of course I got my copy of it. Of course I read it from page to page, and it verified absolutely everything that every one of us had been talking about to our administrators. The harassment, and it even went down to the level of the student athletes who were saying, like, yes, I see discrepancies and disparities everywhere, whether it's in the training room, whether it's in travel, whether it's in the type of shoes I wear, and it was right there. But our president decided to not do anything about it. Well, Ball State immediately got that document closed back up. And we were told, if you gave that document to anybody, you get it back. But the magistrate of the court did get to read that document when they were deciding some things. So here's the sequence of how things happened. The first thing I had to do was to work within the Ball State community of trying to get reinstated and do the appeal process. But no.